What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 6 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop here with your wide receiver preview for this week. Wide receiver, probably, I would say, one of the most interesting positions to talk about for week number 6, with there being 3 of the games being rematches of the week before. Last week we had some guys get all of the targets for their teams. Guys like Kyron Moore, Markeith Ambles putting up 15 targets on the day. How do teams, bounce back or adjust for the rematch in those games? Do those guys get a little more coverage? Do the offenses try to spread the ball more around? It's maybe a little bit tough to predict, but let's go through the wide receiver options for each team in each matchup this week and take a look at which ones I like, don't like, or am kind of in the middle on. Let's start off with the first game of the week, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, the Toronto Argonauts. And let's take a look at Hamilton first of all. So here's the likely wide receiver options for the Ticats this week. The ones I really like, I still have Jalen Acklin in the really like category. I know he's had a couple weeks where, in the middle where he doesn't really get you the points you want out of him. But he started the season with a really strong week with 22.8 points. He, last week against Toronto, put up 12.6. So, just in between 2 and 2.5 points per $1,000. That's what those columns on the chart you see there mean. And you want to try to get a guy in that 2.5 points per $1,000 range to get you to a 100-point week. And I think 14.4 is doable for Jalen Acklin. This offense is only getting better and better with Dane Evans under the helm. He's averaging 11.5, so he's averaging in that 2 points per 1,000 range, which I think is very solid. And I think his price point is reasonable. So I like Jalen Acklin this week. I'm still waiting for him to have another monster game like he had in week 1 because I know he's capable of it. I also really like Tim White, $2,500, 12.8 point average, and you need just 6.3 in order to get the full value out of him. I'm shocked his price has not gone up yet, at least even a little bit. I mean, right now he's averaging 2 times his needed points per game to get you the full value. So you're getting tremendous bang for your buck if you've taken Tim White, and it's a decent sample size now. He's played 3 games in a row. He had 6.8 the first time, 9.8 the second, and 21.9 last week against Toronto. So he's consistently getting more involved in the offense. He's been one of the top wide receiver options for Dane Evans, and I like him at this value at $2,500. The one similar Stephen Dunbar Jr. I put him in the yellow light category. Same price point. He's hovering around the same average, but it's only been 2 games for him. And they've been 2 widely different games. The first one against Montreal, he put up 21.5. He was the big surprise of the week. And then if he tried to jump on that last week, he put up just 3.3 points against Toronto last time around. So it's a small sample size, a little bit smaller than Tim White, so I'm a little more cautious on Stephen Dunbar Jr., and I want to see him get another good week on the board before I go back in his direction necessarily. But at the value he has, if you're expecting a bounce-back week from him, that certainly could pay off for you. The ones I'm staying away from, Brandon Banks, once again, not worth the salary. It is dropping. It's under $13,000 now. But you still need 32.4 points from him, and he's averaging just 10.3 through 4 games. And last week he had 10.7 against the Argos. I believe he did leave the game with an injury, so we'll have to see how well he's ready to go for this week. But if he's 100%, and even if he does have his bounce-back game, that is a monster game you need from Brandon Banks. A bigger game than any receiver, I believe, has put up on the season. So I don't think you get your value out of Banks. And David Unger III did have a solid game last week. He did pick up his first touchdown of the year and put up 11 points, but that increased his average over 4 games to just 3.3. He's been a non-factor despite being a starter in every other game this year. So I say stay away from David Unger III for week number 6. Looking at the Toronto side of things, a lot of different wide receivers to talk about for the Argos. The two I really like are two of the value plays. I've been high on Daniel Braverman all season long. He's the return guy for the Argos, but he also gets involved decently well in the offense side of things as well, which I always love when you can find a guy who does that because, 26.46 is his salary. You need 6.6 points for full 2.5 per $1,000 spent value. And the returns alone should, give him a couple points towards that. Then you only need one or two catches to get you the value you need out of him. He's averaged 10.5 points this year. He had a solid 14.8, 11.4 against Hamilton last week. So he got you the value there. And I think he gets you the value again. I like Daniel Braverman as an option in that Argos offense. I also am starting to like Curley Gittens Jr. He had 14.8. He was the leading receiver for the Argos last week. He had a good week in week number 1 as well. In the couple weeks that he's been the starter, he's had decent production. And at a cheap value at $2,500, I do like that production. He should be a starter in there again with Juwan Brescison being still out of the lineup. The one option I have in the yellow light category for Toronto is DeVaris Daniels at $6,051. He's averaging 10.9 points on the year, so his average is starting to slowly go up. You need 15.1 from him to get the 2.5 range. And, this is a guy in the past I've kind of been iffy on. He has those big games, but he also drops a lot of dud games as well. Doesn't get involved in the offense a whole ton. Well, that happened the first 2 weeks of the season where he averaged in the 3 to 4 point range. And then he had that explosive week 3 against Bombers, 24.8. And then last week against Hamilton put up 11.7. So he seems to be getting more of a share of the targets in back-to-back weeks. Maybe it's the connection with Nick Arbuckle, from both being parts of that Calgary system at one point or another. Daniel seems to be getting more targets his way. I'm still cautious because he does, get those games where he doesn't put you up a lot of points. And at a $6,000 salary, that he may end up being a disappointment, if he puts you up less than 10 points on the week. I could see that happening again. But I could also see him getting a solid share of the targets again this week and putting you up the value you need at least 12 points, maybe a 15. So I put him in the yellow light category. And then the guys I'm staying away from, Eric Rogers, look, he put up 2 touchdowns last week. He had the big production there and had you a solid 16 points. But take away those 2 touchdowns, he had just 4 points on the day. Besides that, I think his production is pretty decently touchdown dependent. I don't think he's going to put you up on any given week a massive, 120, 150 yard day. I think at 94.76, his price point's just too high. You're not getting the full value. You're probably not getting 23.7 points out of Eric Rogers. I don't even know if necessarily you get 19 out of him either. So 12.1 point average, not good enough at that salary for me to warrant putting Eric Rogers in. Ricky Collins Jr., 73.56 is his salary. You need 18.4 out of him. I think that's doable, but he's only done it once this year, and that was week 1 against Toronto or against Calgary, where he had a monster share of the targets. He's coming off of being in COVID protocol. I have no idea whether he's tested positive or if it's just precautionary. I want to see how Collins Jr. performs when he gets back in the lineup before I give him the green light at that salary. To put up 18.4 points. I'm not sure he gets there, especially with Hamilton's defense seemingly turning the corner a little bit here. And finally, the other options I'm staying away from. Deshaun Brissett, he's got into a starting role or a backup role in a couple games. He's averaging just 2.3 points. I don't think that warrants putting up a big game for him. Necessarily. Levi Noel has been a backup all season and has only gotten, a couple catches on the whole year. And Damien Jean-Pierre had his first start last week, put up 1.8 points, and so nothing spectacular from him. And I expect him to be out of the starting lineup as well if Collins Jr. is ready to go. Taking a look at the Saturday triple header, it starts off with Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. Let's take a look at the Bombers first. Kenny Lawler is at the top of the charts here as one of the options I like. He comes in at a $79.10 salary, so he's still under $8,000. He was one of the bigger fantasy disappointments last week, putting up just 6.8 points, but he's still averaging 15.4 on the season. He still has had 2 weeks over that 20-point mark. I know it's dropped in the past number of weeks a little bit, so maybe there's some concern there, but I see the Bombers trying to course correct a little bit here and giving Lawler a bunch of targets again, like we've seen from him in earlier weeks. The thing he's been missing the past couple weeks is the touchdown as well. I could see him getting in for a score. They're looking his way. They love looking his way near the end zone. So it's only a matter of time before he adds that to the board and the fair share of targets he's got as well. And the thing with Bombers receivers is, we got to check the injury reports and the depth charts coming out tomorrow, but it sounds like Saskatchewan could be without 2 of their strong defensive backs, Ed Gainey and Lucius Purifoy, this week, which opens things up a lot for Bomber receivers. So I like Kenny Lawler to have a bounce-back week. He's too good of a receiver to be stuck at just 6.8 points for a second week in a row, and I think he's got that ceiling that he can crush out that 19.8 for you. I also like Rasheed Bailey because I think his value is really good. $45.01 is his salary. He's averaging 10.6 points on the year, and you need just 11.3 to get the full value out of him. Last week for Bailey, a disappointing 4.7 point week as well, but again, I think he gets a little more targets his way. I think the production is still there for him. The Bombers offense, I think, can get going a little more efficiently, especially at home where they seem to be better. So I like Rasheed Bailey at a $45.01 salary. I'm cautious on Darvin Adams and Nick Dembski. Darvin Adams, much like last week, I think he depends on the big play. He's not the guy that's going to eat a ton of targets week in and week out for you. He gets a couple, makes a couple catches, and I think he's dependent on the long play or a big touchdown to put you up what you need as a 17.3 points. He's averaging 8.7 on the year. Last game he put up 10 against the Riders. He had a couple catches for, I think, 50 yards or so. Highest point total on the year being 13.7. He might have a big game at some point, but with the way Claros has been kind of spreading the ball around a little bit, I'm concerned that Adams is not going to necessarily get that big play with a lot of big play receivers available to him this week. And Nick Dembski, I really struggled where to put him in. I thought about putting him in the green light. I have him in the yellow light. I think he's somewhere right in between there. 13.1 points coming off of injury last week was solid production from him, but I think that was definitely padded by the touchdown. I don't see Dembski being the big yardage, big catch total guy week in and week out either. I much like Adams, I think his value is decently touchdown dependent, and that's why I put it in the cautionary category, because I think it's hard with this talented group of receivers to bank on one guy getting a touchdown over the other on any given week. So I like Lawler because he's the big target, big production guy. I like Bailey because he's more of a value play that should get some targets his way. And I'm cautious on those two guys in the middle because I think they may not get their fair share of targets and are too touchdown dependent. Guys I'm staying away from, Naaman Roosevelt. We'll see if he gets into his first game with the Bombers. He's currently not listed in CFL Fantasy at this point. If he does get in the starting lineup, I'm sure he'll be added. Last week, he was around a $6,000 to $6,500 salary, and which to me is way too high for a guy we haven't seen factor into this offense at all this year. I need to see a game from Roosevelt at least before I consider moving him up to maybe a yellow or a green light. Stay away from Charles Nelson this week as well. Look, the Bombers' return game is just dried up. They really haven't gotten a big return in a couple of games now. He's averaging 5.1 points on the year, which is not too bad, but Just 1.8 points last week for Charles Nelson. So until that return game gets better, I say stay away. Kelvin McKnight, likely a scratch again this week. So he goes in the red light category. And Drew Wolodarski, I still have in this category because he got you your value last week at 9.8 points. But I thought that was his best game of the season. And I think that was kind of the cap on what we see from Wolodarski. So he occasionally has those games where he factors in, gets 5 catches or so, and puts you up the value you need out of it. But I don't see him on any given week consistently putting up that production. So I think there's a lot of great value plays this week. So I stay away from Wolodarski and look at the values elsewhere. From the Saskatchewan side of things, it may be hard to believe, but the one receiver I'm staying away from for Saskatchewan is Kyron Moore, the guy who had 15 targets and like 10 catches last week. He comes in at $97.90 as salary. He's averaging 16.4 points in the year. Look, Kyron Moore is having a great year. Fantastic year so far for the Riders. But given his price point, none of his performances have been over into that 2 points per $1,000 ratio. His highest point total on the year came last week against the Bombers with 18.5 points. And that was with 10 catches and that number of targets. And if the Riders are adjusting and trying to get back on track this week in the rematch with the Bombers, I cannot see Moore getting that many balls thrown his way again. I think they need to spread it around a little bit more. Start looking at guys like Lenius, Picton, Jordan Williams-Lambert, giving them a couple more targets. So I think the production from that standpoint drops for Moore this week. You can't ask for more targets or catches his way than he had last week, and he still didn't put you up the point total for his salary. The two I really like are, they have a lot of value plays in Saskatchewan. I still like Lenius. I still like Picton. They both had a bit more of a disappointing week last week, hovering around 3 points each. But like I said, course correction. I think some of Moore's targets will be spread around this week, so I expect a couple more to go each of their ways. I expect Fajardo to have a bit more of a bounce back week, and that should help finding these guys. And they've both been averaging over what you need. You only need 6.3 points from them at $2,500. And they both averaged more than that in 4 games this year. So I like both of them. I'm higher on Lenius than I am on Picton. I think he's gets a little bit more involved, but I think they're both decent options. And then the yellow light, I have Jordan Williams-Lambert. 53.01 salary, averaging 7.3 points on the year. You need 12.6 out of him. Last week, he put up 10.2 against the Bombers. He also had a game earlier this year of 10.9. And 2 weeks around 5 and 3 points in between. So he doesn't get a whole ton of targets normally in this offense. If he was consistently getting more his way, I would put him in the green light because I think he's a talented receiver. But he doesn't get a whole ton his way normally. Last week, I think he got 9 and had 5 catches. I don't know if he gets more his way this week. I think it's pretty much capped at that, I would think. 9 targets is quite a few for him compared to his norm. And so last week he didn't quite put you the value there. But if he has a couple, big gains, then that puts him over the point total you need. I think 12.6 is a very reasonable total to be able to hit if he does get a couple more, or some of those go for a bit further gain. So I put him in the yellow light. And then in the yellow light, I also have Keon Schaefer-Baker and Ricardo Lewis, mostly because they put up decent performances in their one start each. But I just need to see more of a consistency from them. Schaefer-Baker had one start. He was the backup last week. He likely slots in as backup again this week, which means, does he get enough reps on offense? And Ricardo Lewis had a decent day with 5.3 in his debut last week, but I need to see more from him before I choose him over some of the other value plays that have been more consistent, like Lenius and Picton. Looking at the Battle of Alberta rematch, a lot of interesting fantasy options in this game. Kamar Jordan, I I put him in the yellow lights category. $9,078. 22.7 points is what you need out of Kamar Jordan to get the full value. And last week he came really close. He put up 21.3 against this Elks defense. 14.5 is his average through 5 games. Look, he's getting more involved in that offense. He had a lot of catches last week, a lot of yardage, and he didn't pick up the touchdown, which in the previous weeks was what gave you kind of the fantasy value out of him. So Jordan, to me, is a guy who, if he gets more heavily involved in that offense, if you look at the premium priced receivers, I think he's one of the few that can hit his point total on a week. And if Bo Levi Mitchell is starting this week, they have the chemistry from all the way back in 2018, where they connected, quite well throughout a lot of games. So I like Jordan potentially. I put him yellow light just because at that price point, 22.7 is tough to hit on any given week, and he hasn't done that so far this season. So I think good day for Jordan, but maybe he doesn't quite reach the value you need, which puts him in that category for me. The two I really like, Josh Huff and Markeith Ambles. They're two of my favorite fantasy options on any given week. Josh Huff, I think, is still highly underrated at what his salary is. 59.18 is the salary. He's averaging 13 points on the year. He needs 14.8 to get you your full value this week, and he's reached that total in 3 straight weeks with Jake Mayer as the starter. 17.8, 15.2, and 15.5 points for Huff in the last 3 weeks. So he's on quite the hot streak. The concern may be, and this goes for Ambles as well, is, they've had this great connection with Jake Mayer. If Bo Levi Mitchell starts, does he lean more on Kamar Jordan? Does he spread the ball more around to guys like Herji Mayala potentially? The risk is there, but I think that, the bulk of the targets for this offense throughout every game this season have gone to Jordan, Huff, and Ambles, and I think it continues to be that way with those 3 leading the way. So I like Huff at just under 6,000. Markeith Ambles' salary is rising a little bit higher, 72.64. You need 18.2 from him. So I struggled. I almost put him in the yellow light category because I think that's a tough point total to hit consistently or to make sure he hits for you. But he had the big game last week, 15 targets for him, 22.8 fantasy points against this Elks defense. He's averaging 13 on the year, and he's been the most targeted receiver in that Calgary offense this year. So if he continues to keep that up, he's a big possession receiver for them. If he can get touchdowns in there yet too, that's only going to help rise his point total for you. So I like Markeith Ambles this week as well. Malik Henry, I'm cautious on. I think he's a great kick returner, and Edmonton has given up a return touchdown this year, so I think there's some room there. But he did have a down week last week, only put up 2 points. Josh Huff also ended up taking 3 or 4 of the returns away from him. So I say stay cautious on Malik Henry just to see, are they splitting the time back there a little bit more? And maybe he doesn't have quite the performance he did last week against Edmonton. Staying away from Herji Mayala, 5-point average through 5 games this year is nothing to write home about, especially at his salary where you need 12 points per game, or 12 points to get the full value out of him. He has not put nearly close to that up. His highest point total on the year being 9 points in week number 2. So I say stay away from him, and much of the same, Richie Sandani does not get as heavily involved in that offense enough to be worth even a cheap salary. From the Edmonton side of things, look at all these different receivers to talk about. Look at all these different receivers in the green light category. The first one, the high-priced one, I like Darrell Walker this week still. Last week, he put up a decent 15.4 points. 74.72 is how much he costs. He's averaging 12.8. You need 18.7 for full value. And look, Darrell Walker's a game breaker, and I think he has the potential to hit that point total on any given week. He hasn't quite hit it yet this year. He's had a game of 17.8, a game of 15.4. He did have some, disappointing games earlier in the year, just a 5.2 against BC in week number 3, but Walker's a game breaker, and if this Elks offense is running as efficiently as it did last week against Calgary defense, who seems to struggle against the pass, Walker should be able to get to a couple big catches. He should be able to rack up, the yardage and get you easily to that point total. I think there's the potential there. I think 15 points, so 2 points per 1,000 is at least the floor for him. And there's the room for the to go and hit that 2.5 mark, which is what you're striving for. I also really, really like Mike Jones at 48-44. He's averaging more than 2.5 points per his current salary, $1,000 in the range. 12.2 average on the year. You need 12.1. He had a big game last week with 20.7, was the leading receiver for the Elks. And he's put up solid performances in 3 straight weeks. 12 points, 11.2, 20.7 in 3 straight games. Mike Jones, I didn't expect him to be this big of a factor in that Elks offense, but he's turning into one of Trevor Harris's go-to receivers and looks to him near the end zone as well. So I like Mike Jones at that salary. I also like 2 of the value plays if they're in the lineup. Ernest Edwards, Jalen Tolliver, both had games over 14 points last week, which was blowing away the production you need from them to get full value. So I like those value plays as well, especially if Trevor Harris is having another day like he did last week. In the yellow light category, I put Greg Ellingson. He comes in at the highest price point out of any Elks receiver, $87.89. He can have some pretty solid games. He was actually the lowest point total out of an Elks starter last week at just 13.5 points. He has had 1 week this season where he put up over that 22-point mark, but I think it's tough to hit that on a particular week necessarily with all of the options that Trevor Harris has. I think that we'll see the ball spread around. I think he has the potential if he gets the lion's share of the targets, like we saw in that 1 week in week 3 against BC, but not necessarily if they are spreading the ball and looking elsewhere. So I'm cautious on Greg Ellingson, mostly because of the high price point. I'm also cautious on Shai Ross just because he was listed as a backup last week. He did not get involved in that game last week, so I want to see him get back into a starting role before I put him in. If he's a starter, I like him. He's produced well so far in that role this year. If he's a backup, I say stay away. Staying away from Armonte Edwards, high price point, 2 games only, just a 4.2 point average, and coming off a couple weeks of injury. So if he is back in the lineup this week, I don't like him at that price point, and obviously if he is not in the lineup, much the same. And the same goes for Tavon Smith. Missed last week's game due to COVID protocol, and has been a starter 1 or 2 games on the year, but a backup for the most part, and really hasn't gotten the point total. That salary is really crazy high for the usage that you see from Tavon Smith. And finally, getting into the one game that's not a rematch this week, BC and Ottawa. Let's start with BC here. Coming off the bye week, the Lions receiving core is very intriguing to me because this is a team where I think a lot of their receivers are really good, but also kind of overpriced. In fact, Lucky Whitehead's got the biggest average of the year at 15.6. And that only is that's under 2 points per $1,000 you spend on him. The rest of the guys are hovering in that 1 to 1.5 ratio as an average on the year. They can have some strong games, but they're likely not to put you the big point totals you need on a consistent basis because their salaries keep rising. The one I do like is Lucky Whitehead, though. He comes in at $8,025. He's averaging 15.6 points per game. He had a really strong start to the year, 24.6 in week 1, 17.9 in week 2, and then fell off in the past couple of weeks with 7.4 and 12.4 in his last 2 games. But I like him for the bounce back this week. A lot of it because look what Montreal's offense did to Ottawa's defense last week. They've struggled greatly the past couple of games. They're missing some key defensive backs. And we've seen a couple games this year where Riley has targeted Whitehead with a big deep ball that they just didn't quite connect on that really would have changed his fantasy totals for those weeks. So he likes to stretch the field. I think Whitehead's the best receiver for him to throw to stretch that field. And I think it's going to be a very efficient day for this BC offense. So I think Whitehead can hit that 20-point mark for you this week with a big catch. And if not, I think you'll still get a solid number of reps to put you up a decent week as well. I'm cautious on Brian Burnham just because $10,743, you need a 27-point week pretty much to get that big total for you. Very few receivers have hit that point total this year. So I'm not convinced Burnham can put that quite up. I think he could maybe put up a 20-point week for you, much like Whitehead this week. But I'm cautious on him just because, look, he's a game-breaking receiver, but his price total is really high and it's going to be hard to get you the full value out of it. I'm also cautious on Javon Catoy, and this is dependent on him getting in the lineup. I know Lamar Durant left a game last time around with a bit of an injury. Dominic Rhymes left with maybe an injury, I think. So if so, Javon Catoy should get into the starting lineup. He got heavily used in that game against Ottawa 2 weeks ago when those guys went down with injury. And he put up 20.3 points in that game. And you see his average is 5.1, but the first 3 games he was listed as a backup. So he really, wasn't involved in that offense. Go back to 2019. He was a solid contributor at wide receiver for BC when in a starting role. So he comes in at $4,058. 10.8 is the point total you need. And I think if he's in that starting lineup against this Ottawa defense, there should be no problem with Javon Catoy putting up the total you need. The caution I have there is on him putting up, being in the starting lineup. And finally, staying away from Lamar Durant, Dominic Rhymes, and Shaq Johnson. Lamar Durant, to me, the salary is too high. 8.6 points is his average on the year. He, last time around against Ottawa, just put up 2.9. He hasn't put up over 11.1 points on a single game this year, and it's kind of gone downwards a little bit. So his price is a little high. Also, maybe, injury factoring into it a little bit. May not be ready to go this week. I have not checked the injury reports. I'll have that update out for you on Friday. But at his salary, I say stay away from Lamar Durant. I'll also say stay away from Dominic Rhymes. Also might be out due to injury and has not had the production at all. At under 2 points in 3 straight games for Rhymes. So until his salary drops tremendously, I'm not putting him in my lineup. And Shaq Johnson as well, potential value play, but does not get used very heavily in that BC offense and warrant putting in your lineup. And finally, looking at the Ottawa side of things, some interesting plays here. Last week, the most weeks so far this year, we've kind of stayed away from every single Ottawa receiver except maybe Ryan Davis or Devontae Dedmon as value plays. Last week, every single starting receiver for the Red Blacks put up enough points to cover you your 2.5 points per $1,000. So you got value if you picked any single Red Blacks receiver last week. And with Dominic Davis starting, a guy who likes to stretch the field, a guy who likes to, who I think is going to burst that offense a lot more than we saw last time around from Matt Nichols the past couple of games. I like some Ottawa receivers this week. The biggest one I like is Devontae Dedmon, if he's in the lineup. I know he hasn't been practicing for a couple days this week, so he may not be ready to go. So we'll check those depth charts tomorrow. But if he is starting, $47.55 is his salary. If he gets a starting job at receiver once again this week, I hope he does. Because he's so dynamic and so explosive and able to break a game wide open. He put up 250 return yards. He put up 50 receiving yards. He put up a carry last game and put up 19.1 points. Full value for him. You get a lot of that 11.9 you need just from return yards alone. And if he gets involved in that offense, he should be well on his way to getting that for you. Especially, Dom Davis is a guy who likes to chuck the ball down the field. And who better to chuck it to than one of the fastest guys in the league who could potentially break you out a long touchdown or a long gain. So I expect to see a big connection between those two if he starts. I also still like Ryan Davis. He had one of the lower end weeks last week at 7.6 points for Davis, but he's put up solid production really all season long for a $2,500 salary, and I expect him to do so again. Same thing with Nate Behar, 29.16, so he's not quite the lowest value there, price point there is, but he's had 2 decent weeks in a row, putting up 11.6 and 10.7, and seems to be one of the go-to receivers for the Red Blacks. The one I have in the yellow-white category is Daniel Peterman. Big week last week, 26.7 points, 2 touchdowns, a lot of targets, a lot of yards. The reason I'm cautionary on him is because before that, his highest point total in 3 games was 5 points. So I think Peterman, if he was at a $2,500 salary still, I would take him in a heartbeat this week at that point total, because I think there could be the connection there between Dom Davis and Peterman. But I think his salary just jumped way too far since it did last week. I need to see another week from him before I'm willing to put that salary in my lineup, because I could see him falling. I could see the targets going elsewhere, and then he's not worth the point total you need. And then finally, staying away, you can see all those receivers at the bottom. They're mostly backups. Get in maybe for 1 catch, 2 catches a game. Not worth putting in your lineup to me. And also staying away from RJ Harris, 64.22 is his salary. I thought about maybe putting him as a yellow light just to see if Dom Davis goes in his direction a lot like he did in 2019, but he's the highest priced receiver for Ottawa. He did put up, week 1 he put up 4 points, week 2 15.1, or game 2, sorry. Game 3, just 2.6, game 4, 15.7. So he's been on an up and down trajectory all season long, which concerns me a little bit that maybe this is the down week for him. And if there is the potential that BC completely shuts Davis and that offense down, I'm not sure I want to spend one of my higher price points on a guy like RJ Harris. So I like a lot of the cheaper options at receiver more than I do with RJ Harris. That does it for all of the wide receiver options this week. I've gone through them all for each and every team. A lot of ones I like, some I'm cautious on, and of course, a bunch to stay away from. Stay tuned later today. I'll have your defense preview out as well. And if you've missed it, go back and check out the quarterbacks and the running backs. And then stay tuned tomorrow, too, for the depth chart update. The way this week works out with 3 games on Saturday, we should have all of the depth charts tomorrow and be able to make the full lineup decisions on Friday, which is wonderful. So I'll go through those for each and every game and let you know of any notable injuries or changes that may affect your fantasy week. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comments section. Tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42. And I'll be happy to answer them and talk fantasy football with you there as well. So do all that. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.